everybody knows that this is being recorded and streamed right now. Great. So I'd like to call the meeting to order, the MBTA Rider Oversight Committee, and see if anybody has anything they want to say preliminarily. We do have a guest speaker today, which I'm really excited about, but we'll be getting to him in just a minute. It's Ben Stewart from the Boston Chamber of Commerce. And I know that we have at least one person here today with a public comment. And we have two people here today with a public comment.
I've got a short comment.
Okay.
Small.
Okay. I don't know who to start with. So.
Maybe the public.
Yeah, that's my problem. Would you like to go first, Ms. Reynolds?
Sure.
And you can sit with us. You can do whatever you like.
I just wanted to make a comment about the Fitchburg line, which I stand to take, or attempt to take. And on November 16th, which was a Friday, it snowed overnight in Boston and in most of Massachusetts. And one of the trains in the morning was canceled because it, according to T alerts, had hit a snowbank. Now, I think that something should be done in terms of clearing the tracks before trains are set out, if this is going to be an issue. And I wonder what exactly the policy is. And then my second comment is that this morning, a train on that line, which was, I think, the second train of the day, derailed. Unfortunately, it was close to a station, was not traveling fast, and so it was not disastrous. However, according to at least one passenger, one of the wheels came off one of the cars and was molten red in the center and just rolled off onto the side. Now, that I haven't seen that published, but I did see that in the blog. So I wonder what the overall state of maintenance is on that line and what can be done, because passengers shouldn't be exposed to that. And there are many, many early morning trains that get canceled on that line. And that happens in the summer, happens in the fall, happens in the winter, and the spring. So it's totally not related to the seasons. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think we can address those specific points right here and right now, but just to be aware that our guest next month at this meeting in December is Keels, with most of their top brass. So either feel free to come back or just watch online.
And what's the date of our next meeting? Because I think it's moved up because of the
It is
holidays.
moved up into earlier in December.
So let me make sure that you have the date, because
Is it online or have you?
It is.
It is.
It's on our website, mbtaroc.org.
Yeah, okay.
And it'll be on the main website of MBTA and their events as well.
It's the 18th.
it's the
18th.
18th. Yeah, we've changed it with the holidays. So
Okay.
if you could come on the 18th, that might be really good.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you
But again, if
for
you can't
coming
make it,
today.
you can watch online
Okay,
or watch afterwards.
okay, thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. And then Karen, did you want to?
Yes, I'll stay right here. If anybody has looked at the Boston Herald today, they have a short article about the loss of ridership on the MBTA. And as a daily rider of most all services, I would say if I had another option, I might take it. The bus services, it's unreliable. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's awful. And the unreliability makes you not want to take it. So oftentimes I'll take a rail just because it's a little more reliable, although this morning I was on the Orange Line and the car was on and taken out of service. So all of us had to get off, and it was during rush hour. Just saying, this is especially for the Chamber of Commerce, because if Boston is going to attract a lot of good stuff and people the bus service. I know we're going to have better buses. Hopefully they will be more reliable.
Yeah, first, just kind of following Karen, there was a pretty nice article on the Orange Line in maintenance in the Globe today, if anybody didn't see it. It was about the shops and all the work they do. I thought it was actually quite nice, especially since we toured both the Everett shops years ago. It's actually remarkable how much work they've had to do to keep those trains going for 40 years. Secondly, I told people that I missed the last meeting because I was going to go hear Chris Dempsey at the Kennedy School at Harvard. I just wanted to say that he did a spectacular job speaking, which won't be a surprise to people who've seen him here and seen other things that he's done. I'm not going to go into all the things he talked about. He had a full room for that seminar, and he talked a lot about congestion pricing, and he did a really excellent job of it. Covered it in some ways that I certainly hadn't thought of as a kind of a stepping stone toward more logical finance of the highway system.
Any other public comments? Do you have a public comment?
Yes.
Please.
Barry?
Hi, Barry is this here?
It may not be on.
Barry Steinberg, Association for Public Transportation. I just want to give you a report. As of next month, the other entrance of Quincy Adams is supposed to be open. There was a agreement with the city of Quincy. First of all, what happened was about 2 or 3 months ago, the mayor wanted to have stickers for cars. So the only thing is, he wanted basically all the cars in Quincy to have stickers, and he was going to charge a big fee for them. And that was shot down by the city council as a money grab. And recently I saw in the Patriot Ledger that they're going to have a more specific arrangement. The residents of the immediate area will be able to register their license plates. There will be no stickers, no charge. And that seemed to be doable. So it looks like they're going to be opening, because on the opposite side of the tracks that is not open now, the only way you can get in is by taking the bus that runs very infrequently, and it goes past there from Quincy to Holbrook and on to part of Brockton. There have been reports in the past of people climbing over the fence rather than having to do all that. But the bottom line is, it looks like it's going to be open next month.
Excellent, thank you. Any other public comments?
I got a question, or a thing over here. In light of, a lot of,
If we could probably hear you better, if you can stand up.
in light of the climate change activities that are happening everywhere, I was wondering if the MBTA had a plan for mitigating, rising sea levels impacting their service and the impact it's going to have. Because I hear, ridership and these kind of issues they're talking about. But if there's 4 feet of water and most of the MBTA subways are beneath sea level, so is there a plan for that in place or of any kind?
Check out MBTA Focus 40.
I read that actually, but that one didn't pass, correct? It just expired as of like a week ago?
It's a draft.
Okay.
And so the final will be issued at some point. It's a draft.
Did we get a date for, or even an estimate for the final layout? Well, we'll take that as a to-do item, is, at least to follow up, make sure they stick to whatever time frame they promised, assuming that they did. That can be an operations marketing.
Your court.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we'll make sure we follow that.
Great.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I don't think we've covered that, other than just acknowledging that the draft was out.
Like I said, there was an expiration date on it, and
Right.
it kind of ended, so I wasn't sure where it went from there.
Thank you.
Well, that's the expiration for the comments on the draft.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, got
Not the
it.
report itself.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I wasn't sure if it was for funding or whether the expiration date was kind of unclear on what the expiration date was.
Just for the draft. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Funding's a whole other thing.
Any other public comments?
Oh, can I just make one,
Sure.
kind of piling on what you said, I noticed today that MIT Sustainability Day that the Sloan students put on every year is going to focus on transportation, sustainable transportation this year. And they're actually studying the good on climate and energy. And it may be a surprise that the Sloan Business School students would be that good at it, but MIT does a huge amount of global logistics analysis for businesses and supply chain and that kind of thing. So they actually come by it more naturally than you might think. But this year their focus is going to be environment and transportation.
I'm going to rep my alma mater here. UMB has the Sustainable Solutions Lab, which
Okay.
is incredible work.
Yeah.
So,
Great.
I'm in touch with them.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. I know Clark Hirsch and everybody they're doing well.
Thank you. Yes.
Just a quick question. Since we have members of the public here that I don't think I've seen here before, do you want to make a plug for the fact that we're soliciting new members?
You know, it'd be really nice to have you as members. And I mean that sincerely. You're interested in transportation, you're interested in the impact that's on you and your communities, and we would definitely love to have you apply to be a part of this group. You don't have, I'm certainly living proof that you don't have to have the most knowledge in the world about transportation, but an interest in the city and the transportation getting around and the obstacles and what we should be looking at. So please apply.
Yeah, the fact that you're here in person really speaks to your interest, and
Right.
people like you would be probably a great fit for the committee. We've got open seats.
Okay.
That's the same for you, man.
Yeah. Now, do you have to come from Fitchburg to get here?
No.
Okay, then I'd love to have you part of the team.
And I'd like to say that we'd love to have Paul Regan, the executive director of the MBTA Advisory Board, on the committee, but since he comes to
Yep.
Yes.
have investment in finance, such a good speech,
Yeah.
regularly, we get a lot of input from him.
And your beck and call.
Yeah, absolutely. But just by way of introducing him, that's it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now that it's 5:15, if there's any other public comments, we can address them at the end. I'd like to introduce Ben Stewart, who's from the Boston Chamber of Commerce, and he's graciously put together a presentation for us tonight. And depending on Ben's preference, if there are any questions during it, can we go ahead and
Yeah,
ask
absolutely.
them?
Feel free to chime in at any time with questions. There's two things I'm going to speak on that are not really related at all, I guess. One is a report the Chamber put out last March that looked at congestion, and we look at it from kind of the economic angle, being the Chamber of Commerce. And the other is a report that we are working on currently with the Conservation Law Foundation and the MBTA Advisory Board to examine progress on the MBTA's, or the Fiscal Management and Control Board, strategic plan to date, and that will hopefully, this will be the first year we do it, but hopefully it'll be an ongoing report, because I'm sure, as you know, that plan is meant to hit strategic goals over the next couple of years, so we certainly can't assess all of its progress quite yet. So let's see if I can do this from here. So I'll start with the report. I'm sure most of you are T-riders and not drivers, but If you take the E line like I do, you get to sit in the traffic either way, which is quite a delight. So we started this report when in 2017, INREX, who does a lot of traffic studies, came out with their global traffic rankings, which they do every year. Boston came in 7th out of cities in the US, with the average driver spending 60 hours in congestion during the peak commuting hours. So your average person who goes to work, 9 to 5 and drives in is going to spend 60 hours during the year sitting in traffic that wouldn't be there otherwise. Not natural, but congestion itself. This was up 2 hours from the year before, but it's been up significantly over the last 35 years.
Sorry, just a couple questions right off the bat.
Yep.
So how is congestion defined? And then what percentage of the congestion time is it compared to the commute time?
Is the congestion time compared to the commute time?
Yeah, so what percentage of the commute time is spent in congestion, and then how is congestion defined?
So congestion is defined as the added time due to traffic. So if you're supposed to be, if with no traffic during non-peak times, it would be 25-minute drive, and it's a 30-minute drive. That was 5 minutes.
Okay.
5 minutes of congestion. I don't have off the top of my head, I don't know the average commute time during the course of a year.
Okay.
But I could
Okay.
potentially find that for you.
Okay, thanks.
So it's even more striking when you think about Boston being the 7th most congested, in that I know we all have, trouble with the MBTA at times, but we do have one of the most robust transportation systems in the US. We offer every major form of transportation, whether it be commuter rail, heavy rail, light rail, ferry, bus rapid transit. So there's very few systems in the US that are taking in the amount of ridership we are, and we still see that we're one of the most congested cities. And there's just a couple stats there. So all this data we used was for the greater Boston metro region, and 75% of people in that region still use a car. 13% commute via public transportation, which is, it'd be a lot higher if you looked at Boston itself, but this looked at greater Boston, and that compares to 5% national average. So we are doing well in getting people to take public transit, but as the reports that have come out the last couple of days, you may know, in the last few years, we've kind of been trending in the wrong direction on that statistic. So this is where we took it to the economic level. Our question was, what's the impact to these people who are stuck in this traffic? So to calculate this, this will get in the weeds just for a second here, but what we did was we went to American Community Survey data and we pulled how people commute by industry, and we looked at, it'll tell you who commutes by car alone, who commutes by car with another person, who takes public transit, who walks. We took the actual numbers of commuters from this survey for every industry who are driving alone or with someone, because they're both going to be in traffic. And then we assumed that they spent the average amount of time in congestion. It's not a perfect calculation, but it does get you a ballpark estimate of how much time workers in every industry are spending in traffic. And what we saw is certain industries have a lot higher percentage of commuters. For example, construction saw like 90% are car commuters, which I think intuitively sort of makes sense when you're going from one job site to another job site. The flexibility of a car is going to be better than taking public transit, where we saw people working in, industries that are more centered in like downtown Boston, such as like financial services, being more likely to be public transit commuters. We then took their average per hour wage, assumed that they worked for the 60 hours, and it got a cost to those workers of $2.4 billion in lost potential earnings if they could have been working during the time that they spent in traffic. Using the averages across all industries, it was $1,300 per individual worker. And this, it just points out on this slide, this is a conservative estimate. There's other people who have done other studies that try to weigh in other factors, but we really wanted to hone in on this opportunity cost to the worker. But there's certainly other factors to consider when you talk about attracting businesses and workers to this region. I would say one, and probably the one that stands out the most when you think about traffic, is the cost of or the quality of life reduction that you're going to see spending that much time in traffic. But there's also environmental impacts and then other indirect costs, mainly in the form of fuel, but also for many people, childcare costs when they need to build an extra, 30 minutes a day into their childcare budget. It adds up very quickly for those workers. And this looks at the growth of the problem over time. So if you look at over the last 35 years, which is as far back as we could go to find this time in congestion number, so we've added 500,000 car commuters, which is 46% growth despite population growth of 29%. So the disconnect between those two is probably the most concerning when we think about traffic. We're not just adding more people, but a higher percentage of those people that are entering the workforce are choosing to commute via car. And people now spend nearly twice as much time in congestion than in 1982. And that's despite, relatively major investments in our highway infrastructure, mainly via the Big Dig. And then I guess the concerning looking forward part is the projection about our future labor force growth. We are projecting growth of 175,000 by 2040. I think these, you see this statistic a lot. It's from an MAPC study that was done in 2014. Just a few weeks ago, the city of Boston actually updated its population estimate and is expecting significant more growth in its population than they had thought when this study was done. There hasn't been an update of this projected workforce growth yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we go back and actually see a higher amount of growth than this through 2040. And these workers are going to need some way to move from their house to wherever their job is, whether it's in downtown Boston or somewhere else. And if they're going to continue to choose car commuting, we're going to continue to see a real bottlenecking and choking on congestion.
We hold questions to the end, or do we just?
Yeah, if you have a question, just go for it.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like you're saying that the rate of change of population overall is a quicker rate of change than you expected. I'm going to assume that's probably related to the rate of change of the labor force, but I'm curious, are they changing at pretty much the same rate? In other words, is the labor force increasing in parallel with the population overall, or is one growing at a faster rate than the other? Population versus labor.
So I would say the population is growing faster than the labor force. We have, from a labor force and demographics perspective, we have actually a real challenge in that we have an aging population that is choosing to age in place a lot more frequently than we saw in the past. So we're seeing the population of Massachusetts get older, and those people are leaving the labor force but not leaving the population. They wouldn't, this analysis focuses on workers and how they're commuting to work, so that they would not be, if we were to run this again in the future, the people who aged out of the workforce would not be captured in that, because they don't answer that question, how do you commute to work, because they don't commute to work. So I think the labor force essentially will be a bit constrained by demographics, as we have a very large demographic group aging into retirement and smaller demographic groups coming in. But the effect that will have on congestion and traffic is more complicated than just the workers, though this measure, it's important to note, is the amount of time spent in congestion during peak commuting hours. So it doesn't take into account when you try to get to the Cape on a Friday afternoon in the summer or something like that. Well, actually it would if it's Friday afternoon, because that'd be a commuting hour. But if you go Saturday morning, it's not going to take that into account, because that's not a peak commuting hour.
Not Sunday afternoon coming back.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not taking into account those other factors and people getting around for non-work reasons. It's really focused in on that commute to work. So out of this, we made two recommendations which are not really fully baked quite yet. And I think the Chamber's really focusing, as we enter into the new year, on transportation. It's really going to be one of our number one public policy issues, and that's because we see it as a huge business issue. Every business needs to be able to get its workers to work. And we see housing and transportation as kind of two sides of what could potentially be constraining Boston from its ability to attract businesses and workers in the future. People need an affordable place to live, and they need a way to get to work from that place. So it needs to be both, a reasonable distance, but also there needs to be a method of getting there. And if we don't address these two problems, which are huge for the region, I think it'll really start to be an economic, damper on Greater Boston. So the first was exploring a long-term reliable revenue source for both roads and public transit. We don't have the recommendation of how we see that revenue source, but what was key to us is that it is reliable and not volatile. At the time, the millionaire's tax was, when this came out, was still potentially going to be on the ballot, and our concern was that that's because of capital gains taxes, that was going to be a very volatile source of revenue, which you could rely on during up times, but during down times, we need to continue to invest in our transportation infrastructure. So we would like to see a revenue source that's not going to have ups and downs, and is also not going to be able to be siphoned away from transportation to other accounts. So as we start to think about revenue options for transportation, those are kind of our two guiding factors that we'll be using as proposals come up, whether the chamber is going to be supportive or not of them. And the other recommendation is to establish a clear transportation infrastructure plan for the region's growth. I think one of the challenges has been that there's a number of different and sometimes conflicting attempts to do strategic planning for the region, and they're not always one cohesive plan, or how are we going to address everything. So we want everyone on the same page as far as both addressing this congestion piece, but this cannot be addressed without improving the public transportation piece, which will transition nicely into what we're about to talk about next. The fact of the matter is we need people to stop driving if we're going to fix congestion. We're not going to build wide enough roads to handle this many people, so we need to have people moving over to public transportation, which we're not seeing now, and we need a public transportation system that is both reliable, so people have that faith in it, but is also capable of handling increased ridership, which it's not currently seeing, but we would like it to be seeing. We'd like the T to be a preferred option for many people, and not an option that they kind of default to instead. I'll just pause here if there's questions on this part of the report.
Well, I want to say something about the second bullet point under the first point there, where your revenue plan should rely on user fees. I can understand not wanting to have a plan that has fluctuations if you use like an income tax or millionaire's tax. The problem with that bullet point too is that's regressive. And so fees tend to hit people with low incomes harder because the fees are generally flat across the population. Meaning so people with low incomes generally have to pay the same fee as someone with a high income. And so that becomes really regressive, and to the extent fees become proportional to use, then it's even potentially more aggressive, because to the extent people can't live close to their jobs because they can't afford houses close to their jobs. Let's say you have a job in the city, you have to live far out of the city because we can afford. If you have to pay a higher fee because let's say you have a road usage fee, or maybe the T goes towards the distance-based fares, then it hits a lower income population even harder. So that's my real concern about that second bullet point.
I think we are open to proposals on that bullet point. This is how it was worded in the report when we put it out. I think our main point is that we would like there to be a connection, and why we use the term user fees is that we'd like there to be a direct tie between where this money, is coming from, why it's coming from there, and where it needs to be spent, so that you don't see, if you're going to apply, if you say we're going to increase income tax and it's going to go to transportation, it's very easy when something goes in the general fund for it to go in another direction, and there's a lot of competing priorities. The form that user fee would be in, or whether it is like a classic user fee, I think that's not something we're settled on, and I completely understand your point about you don't want to make it unaffordable to be taking public transportation, because then either people aren't going to a job, which is the worst case scenario, or it's really putting a strain on them. But what we want to see is that connection so that transportation revenue can be relied upon as we move forward.
Understand. Thanks.
One thing you haven't addressed, and maybe it's not not part of your purview, is all these parking lots that are just asphalt laying down, particularly thinking about the southwest corridor. That could be housing could be there. It seems to me, one car, one person, one day, one piece of land, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of gets to a housing discussion, which the chamber is happy to have. We are strong supporters of transit-oriented development in all senses, and we are also supportive of zoning reform that would make it easier, in particular, to build transit-oriented projects. I think that, a zoning discussion it's like a whole nother can of worms, but we totally agree there does need to be production of more housing and more creative uses of space. I think the T has been active in the last few years in trying to promote transit-oriented projects, and a challenge is, of course, that once you start building housing in these parking lots, you're bringing in a lot more stakeholders. There's a parking lot already there. When we start to build housing now, we're going to need zoning approval from the city or town. You're going to face, some opposition, concerns about increased school costs if children are to live in that housing. So it's a very complicated discussion, but the chamber is supportive of making it easier to get those projects off the ground, and that is going to be probably our number 2 focus as we go into the next legislative session. Is number 1 is going to be transportation, but number 2 is likely going to be housing and the need for both affordable housing in the traditional sense and workforce housing in a broader sense.
I'm thinking of the parking lots as making it too easy
To drive?
for people to drive. So I think some of the parking lots are owned by the hospitals and everything, and I'm sure they probably do charge them a certain amount for their parking. I just think it makes it too easy, especially if your income is over $100,000. That whatever you're paying for parking, you're not going to ride the T. There's not enough financial disincentive for you if you're making a somewhat decent salary to give up the privilege of riding right to your work, or maybe not exactly to your work, but then there'll be a shuttle bus over. I don't know what the answer is.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's very easy to drive, and that's why you see that 75% of people commuting via car. There's certainly a number of programs that are, policies that workplaces could implement to try to encourage T ridership, and I think some of them are great policies.
Yeah, 2 things. One, I think one thing that's pretty obvious as a candidate for revenue would be a carbon tax at this point. If you don't count indirect energy use, buildings are about 20% of all use, and transportation is about 40%, and power is about 40%. As a state, we've done really well on, it seems, by many metrics, in shifting power over to cleaner sourcing, and we've done a horrible job with transportation. So if you use a carbon tax, then the transit that's electrified, which is using clean power, is not going to get taxed, and that will go to some of the equity issues. And the people who have fuel guzzlers on the highway are going to be paying that tax. Also, I'd just say on the buildings, Massachusetts is one of only 3 states that's adopted the 2015 International Energy Conservation Code. So it's pretty aggressive at this point on all new building technology. And they're having a webinar in the next week or 2 on 2018. It's a 3-year cycle. So we're actually pretty aggressive on housing as well as power. And we're horrible on transportation. So carbon is obvious there. To kind of address your second issue, which is housing balance, most cities with excess employment in the core have congestion and housing problems, right? So Boston and Cambridge have twice as many jobs as they have workforce living in those communities. So with regard to radial commutes, that congestion is almost entirely due to the imbalance of employment and population and housing in Cambridge and in Boston. Now, if you're looking at the ring roads, like 128 or 495, that's different because people are living in one place and commuting in both directions. But with regard to the central urban economy, the housing and congestion are both a result of the imbalance of population and jobs, which imbalance also is mirrored in the commercial tax base.
Yeah, I mean, this point's taken. This report does look, I guess, it is across all of Greater Boston, so it is capturing the other parts of that. But that certainly is the challenge, is certainly that people are trying to get into
Often
Boston.
we see, and then I'll stop, sorry, but often we see a suggestion that we put mixed income housing out in the gateway cities, which lack financial resources to provide any quality of life to additional low-income residents, equivalent to suburban quality of life or to some of the middle or higher income parts of the urban core. So I just don't think throwing mixed income housing out into places like Lawrence and New Bedford and so on is a viable proposal. And we're further constrained by the fact we have no counties to balance out some of the imbalances in income and equity in the municipalities. The places that have really strong county government and finance and school systems and parks and things like that, they balance those finances out across the regions. We don't do that because we have no counties effectively. So I'm assuming you're actually tackling those things fundamentally, because without doing that, you're not going to be able to make too much progress with these issues.
I mean, tackling income inequality is that's a broad thing to take on. The Chamber does have a group dedicated to economic opportunity that tries to address these issues in ways that we can pull levers on them. I think, we cannot tell a wealthy town or a non-wealthy town what to do. I mean, our focus is the Boston economy and the businesses that support the Chamber and making Boston the best place for businesses to thrive. This economic opportunity group in the Chamber does try to pull some of these levers of inequality. But I mean, that's a little outside of my work at the Chamber. It's not part of the policy team. We have a separate team dedicated to this that runs a Pacesetters program that tries to connect minority-owned businesses with large companies for procurement contracts. We have a number of professional development opportunities. So I take your points, but it's kind of outside of the policy work that we're currently undertaking.
Okay.
So, bring us back a little bit closer to this, two completely different lines of questioning. First, not to minimize the issue here, because we all know there's congestion, but it's part of the statistics and what you've been looking at. Have you started to see the trend towards work from home, and whether it's hoteling or alternate days in the office? Is that making a dent at all in terms of congestion, or are those concepts still too new and too few of that applies to a handful of larger corporations, and it's just not a meaningful impact on the workforce coming in and out of the urban core?
Yeah, that was something we looked at briefly while writing this report. We thought we'd see a higher increase in the number of people who are working from home, and it wasn't as big as we expected. Part of that is is due to how the survey methodology works, in that a lot of people have kind of a flexible schedule, and they will sometimes work from home, but if you ask them, how do you commute to work, they're not going to say, I work from home. They're going to say, I drive, even though they sometimes work from home. So you're not capturing, with the design of the question is not going to perfectly capture that growth in flexible scheduling. Does that answer your question? Was there another part to it?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
It sounds like you looked at it, wasn't as meaningful as you thought, which answers.
Yeah, and it's potentially, it could be something we see more of in the future, but I think there's been a lot of talk about, can flexible scheduling help relieve both congestion and then overcrowding of public transit at peak commuting hours? If you're letting people come at different times, does that help? We haven't done any analysis on that.
I think we'll be more forced into that. If all of a sudden it takes you 3 hours to commute to work, you're going to start making the choice to
Exactly.
I'll just work from home. But I don't know. it's going to be a while before things have to get that bad. I think some people suddenly start saying, "Yeah, I don't want to interact with people. I want to stay at home." Completely different line of question. You started to touch on this a little bit in terms of the chamber's role. The chamber believing that public transportation is a good thing. Do you have a set of recommendations or or policies regarding what ideally a business should be doing to either promote or incentivize the use of public transportation? Is there a firm stance in saying different companies get a score in terms of like you're an A+ advocate of public transportation and you're doing you're getting a goose egg?
No would be the short answer. We have been supportive of like very specific bits of legislation that looked at like tax breaks provided if you were, or that can be provided to someone for public transportation and like, subsidized commuter passes and stuff like that, but we have not taken kind of a firm stance on that side. Our work or efforts so far, which we'll get into the next part on the public transportation side, have been really focusing in on, the strategic plan, what's its progress, and we see, assessing that progress as a step that's necessary if we're going to have this discussion about revenue. And that's why we don't, for us to come out and support an increased tax or whatever the revenue source may be, we want to first, understand, is MassDOT in the position to take the action with this increased revenue and make meaningful improvements. And I think that's kind of where we are right now, and we are hoping to take those next steps as we go in through the next year.
And I'm glad you're doing all that, and that's the longer-term strategic play. I guess it's, but then you're really playing the game of how do we figure out how to influence the legislator, influence the T to kind of do some longer-term stuff, versus taking a more tactical view of what can our membership do today to influence that discussion? Should it, ideally, is there a set of, even a set of bullet points of like, for our recommendations to business are offer all your employees a subsidized T-Pass, or even if it's not subsidized, access to be able to direct deposit a T-Pass, or I feel like there's a set of recommendations you can make. It's fairly limited in obviously you wouldn't hold anybody to this, but coming up with a list of recommended ways to your members to promote, at a minimum promote, at best incentivize transportation is a quicker road to success than let's figure out how to create a new tax and then build, acquire better trains and build more subways. It just seems like I get the appeal of the one, but I feel like there's a missed opportunity.
I mean, I take your point, and I can take it into consideration and bring it back. But I think it's currently hard for us to go to our businesses and say, really make sure you get more people on the T, if it's not going to be a reliable source of transportation. I think it's a good idea. It's not something we've done, and it's something we could consider. We do, try to at times push out information along these lines, but we have not yet done it on this transportation bit.
Can I chime in, because I might be able to help you out on it?
Yeah.
The T is trying to increase its pass, or make its pass program more effective, and that is kind of one of the things that it's doing. And we had a guy who came to the Capital Investment Finance Subcommittee meeting, Brendan, I forget his last name, I think it's Fogarty. I know they're working on that, and there was a slide deck. There was a presentation to the FMCD about what they're trying to do to get businesses to get more of their employees to get T-passes and encourage them to use the T more. So it might be that we can interface, with people here, in order to get them working with businesses more. Certainly loop the chamber in to the extent necessary, but I think we can do something on that end.
And the chamber met with I believe it's called the PERC now, PERC Pass. It was rebranded. It was before that rebranding, but we did meet with that team. I know part of the revenue assumptions for this year for the MBTA rely on increased use of this corporate pass. The chamber itself, for its employees, does provide both a pass through, or like a pre-tax pass and a subsidy for the people who use public transportation. So we are kind of walking the walk in that sense. But, I mean, we just have not done that work of, pushing out ideas to members. It's not, we have a relatively diverse membership at the chamber, so it certainly wouldn't fit all, but it's something we can consider.
No,
Can I just say something? We have about 15 minutes left, and I know that you have an entire,
Okay.
I'll let you- I'll
piece of
let-
this. So.
All right.
I'll thank you for answering.
Yeah, thank you. Just because we also have the part about their work on the MBTA advisory board, and I'm afraid we're not going to reach it.
Yeah, no, we're good.
Great, thanks.
Okay, the next part is directly related to the T. So the accountability report, as I said, we're doing this in conjunction with the advisory board and the Conservation Law Foundation, which we think provides 3 good perspectives. Business community, the cities and towns that are getting the service from the T, and then environmental advocates as well. And the goal is to examine the progress on the strategic plan, which came out in April of 2017. It was, let's just actually, I'll move a little quicker through this. We have 15 minutes. This is the line from the strategic plan itself that we've been going back to time and time again. If executed well, the plan is intended to ensure that there's never again a deterioration of our public transit system, and instead that we are supported and held accountable to continuously improve the vital service we provide. So we are hoping this report will both hold them accountable, but also provide the support that the MBTA needs when it advocates for increased revenue to improve its services. So I don't know how familiar you are with the strategic plan itself. It has a large number of goals that are outlined pretty clearly. It essentially bullet points goals and sub goals under them. We found it had 10 areas. We found that a bit hard to manage when we first went about getting into this project. So what we did was we used the framework of the 3rd annual report from the control board, which highlighted these 4 areas as the 4 main areas they spoke to. So we took the remaining 6 and grouped them under these 4 so that we would be keeping it to 4 areas. And then what we've done in this first report, there's kind of a number of goals you could see them as when you read through the report. Some are very clear, measurable goals, which is what we're going to focus on. And they say we are going to do X by X date. So it has a clear finish thing, and it has a clear time they're going to have that item done by. There's other things that we would call more kind of aspirational, like rethink the commuter rail system. It's important work, but how am I to say if you're on track or on time when I don't know what rethink means and I don't know when you're supposed to do it? We're not saying that those things shouldn't be done, but our purpose here is to really hone in on the specific action items the T said it would have accomplished by a certain date and assess their progress on those. We also recognize that a good amount of strategic thinking is done outside of this strategic plan. We discussed Focus 40 a little earlier. That effort had begun when this plan came out, but was not completed. And there's also strategic visioning in there. And then every year when the T rethinks its capital investment plan for the next 5 years, it's making essentially a set of strategic decisions on what project it's going to fund over the next 5 years. I think the important distinction between the two is that Focus 40 are not funded projects. They're a vision for what the future of the of all of transit will be in 2040, where the capital investment plan are projects that they're actually going to fund over the next 5 years. So those are really coming down the pipeline and not just visioning statements. Our goal would be that as the control board updates its strategic plan, which is currently occurring, that it will incorporate new goals that came out of Focus 40 or out of their annual budget process into one strategic document. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about having one vision for transportation for the region. We would like there to be one, strategic planning document that both, people making the decisions for the MBTA can refer back to, but also for the public. It's hard to follow every control board meeting and read every deck and keep up to date on everything that's happening at an organization of this size with this much complexity. So it would be great for there'd be one place to go and say, did this happen? Yes, no, it's happening, it's behind schedule, it's ahead of schedule. So I'm gonna quickly walk through the goals we've pulled out to date. Just a big caveat on all of this, we are like in the middle of this project, so we're in the back and forth getting data, identifying who we need to get things from if things were done. I'm going to try to hit on a couple of them and tell you, what we know about them so far, but there's some that we just really haven't gotten around to digging into yet. The first release of this report will come out at some point in Q1 of 2019, so it won't be too far away. And then hopefully it'll be annual around that time. Our hope was that having it out early in the year when the T's having its budget discussion will help them when the T is advocating for itself or thinking about the decisions it needs to make on its spending. So for fiscal sustainability, these are the three, and another key point is the goal we have here is just the headline goal, so a lot of these have a bunch of pieces below it that track progress along the way. This is just, these are like the main goals, if you will. Generate $100 million in non-fair owned source revenue by fiscal year 21. We know the T has had really good success so far on this goal of increasing its own source revenue. It is certainly on track to make it by 2021. It had $88 million in FY18 in own source revenue, and it's budgeted for over 100 in FY19, which would be great. And then eliminate reliance on annual appropriation for operating support. So I know this was the big headline when they did the year end last year, was that they balanced the budget for the first time, which that means that they still get the annual appropriation. And what it means is that $127 million appropriation can go to the PAYGO capital fund, which is a way to spend outside of the capital investment plan on capital projects. It comes in, I think, when they talk about there was all the stories about the garage problems they were having. This is a source of capital that can be expended quickly and address problems like that weren't foreseen, and that's great when we try to think about eliminating capital backlogs. Though for the current fiscal year's budget, they're back to having a deficit. It was at $36.5 million in the initial budget, and there's a budget update, I believe, yesterday that it was, I believe, roughly at the same point still. So hopefully there'll be, that at the year end we'll have a balanced budget again. If that'll happen or not, it's impossible to tell at this point. But that means that money won't be going to the capital lockbox, which is unfortunate because that would be a better use of it. But there's certainly been progress to date on that goal. We have not looked into the fair aviation goal yet. It's by 2021, so there's still a ways to go on that one. Won't be a huge focus of this year's report. For the customer category, we're calling it, one of the main goals by the end of 2027 to establish targets for necessary capacity on the core system and increase ridership due to economic growth. From our preliminary analysis, there's been a great deal of work done on this, doing capacity analysis and demand analysis and future demand analysis of each line, and those have been used to help with the integrated fleet and facilities plan, which is great work. What we'd like to see next, I think, is this integrated fleet and facilities plan is much like Focus 40 is not bound by expenditures, so it's not a budget-based, it's a planning exercise without the dollar allocation. So what we'd like to see is for those efforts to work their way into both the annual budget as well as the capital investment plan. I think that's certainly the purpose of the planning effort, and that's what we will see, but that's where we're at on that one. And then Better Bus we talked about earlier. I haven't gotten too deep into the analysis on the Better Bus and New Bus phase in, but I know there's been a lot of work done on it. The new automated fare collection system, they're certainly on track to meet the 2021 goal with the vendor selected, the first public-private partnership for the T, and this new system will allow for fare flexibility that we haven't seen, allow for backboard or backdoor onboarding for buses, and I think, alleviate some of the challenges that we see now. I know there was the Globe story recently about how you end up with 2 buses right in a row, and one of the things is, everyone loading on that front door, adding money. So there's been good progress to date on the fare collection system 2.0. I haven't dug too deep into the human resources piece yet. There's a number of goals that are coming up or have already passed. I know there's been a fair amount of work on it, but kind of honing in on what has and hasn't been done specifically, I just haven't gotten around to it yet, frankly. So stay tuned on that one. And then I think number 2 here is kind of like the million-dollar question, which is what do we do next? I know that the control board addressed this a little bit yesterday, but when when the control board ends, how will we continue to govern this? Because the work of the control board will not, or the work of fixing and reinventing the T will not be done when the control board's term ends.
They can join us.
And we're coming up quite close to the end.
Okay, I'll just hit on this top one here then. So this is like in my mind, the most important goal of the strategic plan, which is eliminating the state of good repair backlog in 15 years. There has been progress on increasing the amount of capital dollars that are going out the door. They did not quite meet their state of good repair goal in FY18. They spent 93%. FY19 is budgeted to spend 100. I think the bigger challenge, which we have here on the next slide, is that the projection that they're publicly, at least that's out there, it keeps going back to is this 7.3 billion projection from 2015, and we know for a number of reasons that this projection is low. First of all, it doesn't have the commuter rail in it, so that's going to be likely billions of dollars in state of good repair, as we know, with a train derailing today. There's no factor for inflation, which over the next 15 years, there's certainly going to be inflation. And then it doesn't address a change in mindset about how we do capital projects that has occurred since this 2015 projection. And that change in mindset is that it's not just about, what do I want a red line train to look like today? That's what traditionally state of good repair means. It's like it's up to date today. The control board and the MBTA have taken an approach of what do I want it to look like in the future. That's what Focus 40 was about. That's how they're thinking. And it is, if you're going to make a capital investment plan, it is, I would say, wise to make a plan for the investment for the future and not to get up to today, because by the time you're done with a 3-year project, you're then 3 years behind. But that's going to drive up the cost of this $7.3 billion projection. I don't think I wouldn't say, it's not a negative thing to say that cost is going to go up, but it will be hard to monitor progress on a classic state of good repair chart, which this is, going forward because of this change. So defining what are going to be the best investments and making sure that we're spending the amount of capital needed to reach those investments is certainly going to be something that we hope is continually analyzed as they update the strategic plan, that they come back to this, redefine what their goal is. Maybe it's, maybe you need to go above the 0.5 billion, or, maybe you need to spend more than this. And, that's something we could be supportive of if the thought process is right there. So that's the last slide. That's my information if you have questions for me.
Yeah, so a quick point. I think if you wait until the beginning of the first quarter of the year to make recommendations about budget, it's going to be too late, because they're on the fiscal year, starts in July, and if you do that report, let's say in February or March, you're not going to change anyone's input on the budget. And so my suggestion, and maybe Paul can speak to this more, is that you try to do that, do your report like in the beginning, the first quarter of the fiscal year for them, And so that by the time they're having their discussions about, what, the budget's gonna look like for the next fiscal year, especially on the capital side, you might have a chance of changing some minds, because the March is just too late because they're locked in. At that point, they're trying to get the board's approval for the budget by the end of June, usually by the end of May. So if you're saying, in March, you should do this, they're gonna go, we can't redo this now. So that's just my suggestion at that point. And the other is a little bit of a cheat, please forgive me. The congestion stuff was all geared towards cars. Have you all considered doing a study about how the delays and waiting for transit affects the transit rider and what the cost is to them? That's a
Great question.
That's a great question.
We did consider that half of it. It is a lot harder from a data perspective to get that information. It's certainly something we'd like to do. The policy team at the chamber is 4 people, and the research team is me. So it is I'm not a transportation expert, and it's at the end of the day, it comes down to a time thing for us.
Thanks.
But we're certainly aware of that half of it, and would have loved to do it if it was kind of a better data source for us to go to.
Right, thanks.
Hey, Paul, so
Just to address a couple of the issues Lenny brought up. The MBTA budget has to be done by the board by April 15th. So the FMCB has shown in the past couple of years a willingness to push back on the budget as presented by the staff. So, there are key issues that you just raised about, especially around the MBTA's ability to manage money and personnel. There's an expectation by the board that operating budgets will reflect their desire to see improvement in those areas. If improvement isn't, and they will ask questions. They have the last 3 years. I expect them to ask questions this year as well, to keep the pressure on the staff, to make sure that the internal changes are done better. So if you have $850 million to spend on your capital program, you have the operating room, and you have the staff in place through your HR department to actually get that done. And they haven't in the past, and those departments have been under pressure by the board. I expect that to continue. They want this document, the strategic plan, is a product of the pushing of the FMCB members, and they are looking to see that those priorities are being pushed by the MBTA staff. That's why I think that they were so open to the idea of 3 fairly disparate organizations coming together to keep their feet to the fire on it.
And I think the other important thing is this is not, the 3 of us didn't get together and just, we're going to do this. This is the MBTA is, they're the ones who are going to be providing us with the information. It's a dialogue that's occurring that while the final report is going to come out then, hopefully conversations that happen during that time will, be helpful to them and us as they go through this budget process.
Okay, so if there's a dialogue before the end of the report, because I'm really thinking about the capital investment plan more than anything else, because and in fact, with the capital investment plan, it's only that 5th year, meaning that's new programming. That's usually the first 4 years are already programmed out. And so, given the deadlines, if you're not having a discussion with them until the end of the report, then it's too late. But if you have a discussion with them as you're doing the report, a similar report, then that's a whole other thing.
If I may.
Yeah.
Just want to point out that the CIP, the 5-year plan, it's an implementation document, but it's renewed every year. So that plan includes things that were started, projects that take 3 or 4 years, that started 3 or 4 years ago, and has room after February, after January and February, to add additional projects that are incorporated either into the normal bonding that they do through their own revenue streams and through the federal grants or through the lot bonds. So the fact that it's a 5-year plan is it's not a snapshot that locks them in for the next 5 years. It's an evolving implementation document. Things are going to fall off, things are going to be added. And I think that, especially in the next 18 months or so, the FMCB is going to want to try to institutionalize a way to make sure that the goals of the strategic plan are implemented on that. But don't lose sight of the importance of the capital budget. I mean, of the operating budget. The MBTA, you could argue, doesn't have a capital budget crisis. It has an operating budget.
Yes, exactly.
You know, I mean, the $36 million, you know, that's a good number for a deficit compared to some of the numbers they could have should the ride go crazy, should pensions continue to rise, should anything happen to commodity costs like fuel, electricity, and natural gas. I mean, $36 million, it could be a lot worse than that. That's the number. That's the budget.
Yeah, I'm all for operating budget, that's for sure.
Thank you so much, Ben. This has been wonderful.
Yeah.
Having you there. I know you put a lot of effort and work into this.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys do have, that's my email, so it's on the chamber website. The report that I mentioned earlier is also on the chamber's website. If you'd like to look into it, if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. By the way,
Yeah.
I don't know if we actually introduced Paul.
I thought Len had introduced Paul.
But as his role as well.
Grabbed it for 30 seconds.
Well,
I don't know what happened at yesterday's board meeting.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out, Paul Regan is the executive director of the MBTA advisory board.
Yes, so Paul is also part of this report.
Paul's like a rash on it.
Always glad to have you here. So if we want to look at the subcommittee reports, who wants to make one?
I'm really hoping Brian.
I can present for the capital and finance committee, but I guess I don't have too much to update. Because we mostly just talked about future events, and actually I don't remember anything specific to highlight.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, we did a lot of planning for the next meeting. Our guests, we invited Sandy Johnson from CPS to be kind of late in the process, and so he had a conflict. He couldn't make it, so we're planning what we're going to discuss with him, mostly around our suggestion for a potential study that could be done, that could put as reimbursed for the UPWP, the Unified Planning and Work Program. Is that? Yeah. And so that was it. We went over some of the slide decks, and I forget what else discussed, but it wasn't ground shaking, ground breaking. I'll go through those and maybe say something after marketing.
Fred?
Yeah. So I'm going to ask on my fellow attendees to help me with it. I will carry the lead. The biggest thing that we tackled in the meeting is we're doing a change of leadership at the top of the committee. So I am stepping down as co-chair of the subcommittee. I just don't have time to do it properly. Against to get the invites out and the like. So Stefan was voted in or agreed to take back the reins on that committee. So I will still be an active participant, but stepping aside and let new old blood take the reins again. That was a big item. Anybody was there? Do you remember what we talked about? We talked to you for half the meeting.
Lots of just bus stuff. We talked a little bit about the Better Bus project and our progress on it. Public outreach should be starting in the new year, so keep an eye towards that.
Yep. So, yes, definitely following the Better Bus work closely. Remember anything else we talked about in the meeting? Len, you remember anything else we talked about in the meeting? This is the worst. See, this is why I'm retiring as the as the unprepared co-chair.
Well, by the way, I was on the Mattapan trolley the other day. Wonderful ride.
I ride the Mattapan line every day, so that's my stuff. I'll tell Paul.
Okay.
That's my area of expertise.
He loves it.
I do.
Everyone does.
Yeah, there's no reason not to.
Yeah, he loves it, especially during a blizzard.
I got off at Butler to go to the library. I walked down, saw the Baker Chocolate Pub. It's beautiful, just beautiful.
Very nice. If I guess we'll go back to finance.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we did discuss the following up with Brendan Forgany on the pass program. We had a really good discussion with him early this summer, and it's definitely going to be worth following up with him about what they had proposed at a recent FMCB meeting, and in light of discussion that we had here about that, because I think definitely more that can be done with that. And when I looked at the original framework for it, it seemed like there was a way to measure the extent to which businesses were participating, but more importantly, the extent to which that was having an impact. And so it would be nice to really put some meat on that framework, and I think he'd be up for interacting with us more. So I think I'm going to take the lead on that and follow up with them, especially after the holidays, on that. Let's see. So we have Sandy coming for December, and right now we don't have any firm plans for January, but that's it. The only thing I'll say is another one thing that Ben Stewart said. He says it's hard to keep up with the FMCB slide decks. It's not. It's not. It's easy to do it. You can do it while you're on the train, and you'll be better off if you do it. So I encourage everyone, to just read every deck that comes on FMCB while we have an FMCB, because it's a lot of nice, good information. And the only way you're going to understand what's going on, in the system, is to read stuff. You're not going to get much just sitting around at meetings listening to people. So that's it.
Okay, do we want to, if that's it for the subcommittee meetings, we can look at the minutes now and see if anybody has any comments or discussion on the minutes.
Motion to approve. Second.
Now, why don't we separate them out? I wasn't here for one, so I can, so we'll go September, one vote, October,
Okay, so,
Fair Motion to approve September. Second.
all in favor? Any opposed? Any further discussion?
I'm abstaining.
So moved.
Motion to approve October.
Second.
Is anybody, all in favor? Okay, any opposed? No further discussion? So moved.
So just general discussion about the minutes in general?
Yes.
Okay, so in the executive committee meeting, I had mentioned that I hadn't put much effort into keeping up with the minutes because maybe about 5 years ago, when we changed from the model of having the manager secretary, we do all of the minutes for all of the subcommittees, to the interim model, which is just doing the minutes for this meeting. The quality of the minutes deteriorated greatly, and I felt it just wasn't worth the effort, to try to maintain that standard for two reasons. One is that there was just going to be a lot of hurt feelings in the process, and two, I didn't think people really cared about them enough to wage that battle. The last two interns have been really good. The quality of the minutes have gone up a lot. I'm going to hold you to this, Brendan. You're telling me that the quality is going to stay high.
It's Jay.
Sorry.
I don't know what.
You're talking to Brendan Forgany.
It'll be worth it to the extent that you all have, other people have dealt with the minutes the way I have, because it just hasn't been worth it. It seems like it will be, and as Jay had pointed out, it is a good way to keep abreast of what happened at previous meetings so that we can follow up on things. I mean, and when they were, when the quality was high, it was really good to have, that record, so, and Jay does a really great job. I mean, I know you feel that people aren't reading them when we say do a good job, and that we're just saying it to say it, but they really
No,
are.
they're really good.
They're really good.
They're really good. They are.
You set a high bar, and so
How long do we have you?
I will be here at the next truck meeting, but that is my last week, so I will have to do the minutes quickly. And then you'll have Eric Jewell starting in January.
Where are you going next?
Back to classes at Northeastern. I know Eric a little bit. He seems very smart, very capable, very personable.
Thank you. And you also mentioned, just because we may have an extra minute, that a lot of that you know some people who are going to be working on the education aspect of the.
Oh, sure. Well, starting in January, there'll be a lot more people joining the AFC outreach team. So if you're not able to speak with Anthony soon, they'll have a small army of Northeastern co-ops and others help spread that word, manage those programs.
Yeah, I was worried he'd be completely overwhelmed and overloaded. Not because of lack of aptitude.
No, it's just a huge
He's only one, he was only one staff member working under
So that's
the
great.
PM. I can't remember the PM's name.
David Blockchain.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I'm glad you'll be there.
So, okay, well now we're ahead of schedule. Reports on external meetings.
So I was not able to attend the Regional Transportation Advisory Council because my bus back from New York, the Greyhound bus back from New York, broke down. So it's very late, and not gonna bash Greyhound, but I'll just say like 3 of my last 4 trips, be back from New York, have had breakdowns, and that's been in the last 3 months, but you can't take care of life. But I did get, I saw the slide deck from the presentation by Beth Harvey. It was on the equity policy, the DBDI policy, and it was pretty much just an update with respect to what had been done. I mean, it was the same presentation essentially that had been given to the Boston MPO. I have not had a chance to listen to the recording because I'm sure Beth was queried as to why they decided that they wanted to place a threshold beyond simply seeing a difference, in the effects on the equity on the. I'm sorry, I'm just a little confused here. Let me back up. Right now, what they are trying to do is to develop a policy so that if they have a plan, they can see if that plan will impact the minority populations and low-income populations differently over the course of the plan, which is about 20 years. And so if there is a difference, it needs to be significant in order to show up as a difference. But beyond that, they want to establish a threshold. So like if it is different, is 5% difference a problem? Is it 3% difference a problem? They're trying to determine that threshold. And the group that had worked with them has said, no, if you see any difference at all, it's going to be an issue because the feelings were that it takes so much of a difference to get beyond the margin of error when you're projecting out 20 years that if anything pops up, it's worth looking at. And so they decided that they still want to have a threshold beyond that. And so I'm sure there was some query into that. I just haven't listened to the recording to tell you what that is, but that's what happened at that meeting according to I talked briefly, I had a brief interchange with Jen Rowe. So that was that. Sorry, that was a little convoluted, but I hope it made sense.
No, it made sense.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, can I just make one comment on that? I mean, Len has heard this before, I have terrific respect for everybody who works at CTPS and MAPC. But the way they analyze environmental justice is to take the whole EJ population for a region and compare it to the whole non-EJ population. So what that means is that the really big disparities in small areas are completely overlooked. So the people that have, where the greatest disparities happen is where the situation is, the top 5% worst situation. But that gets completely buried when you're comparing one whole part of a population to the whole rest of a regional population. And, I'm just making this as a comment, but we have the data in great granularity, and we're not really using that data to find the outliers that are the most problematic. I mean, we have it. All you got to do is screen for it. But because the analysis is done in bulk, we're not addressing those things. It'd be like testing the general population for public health, and then ignoring the 5% people who are sickest.
Right.
I mean, it's just, to me, it's not logical.
But do you know why they don't do it? Do you know why?
It may be regulatory. There are kind of framing, regulatory framing. These are all federal compliance, right? Civil rights and environmental justice are both federal compliance issues. But I've brought it up over and over again. Scott Peterson was nice enough years ago to give me all the really granular data, socioeconomic, pollution, density of traffic and population, all of that stuff, and it's great data. But I think you can understand the health analogy. If you're trying to provide public health and you're not focused on the 6-5%, then what are you doing?
I'm just trying to understand why it is that they don't do it, because without understanding why they don't do it, we can't understand how to get them to do it. And I can understand that it's an issue that maybe what the feds require doesn't require that they do that. But I mean, the MPO seems to have a reputation of going beyond.
MPO is terrific.
Yeah.
The T-staff attitudes that we come across are terrific. But it's been that way for a long, long time. And I brought it up at the first meeting. I wasn't a member of the committee, but I brought it up and pretty clearly. And
right. Well, there were two other things. Well, another thing that was going on too, because there was that, and then the whole notion of they take all of the projects for the LRTP and group them together and do the assessment on the group meeting and see, as opposed to breaking them out. Because the assumption is that each program that has been selected or each project has been selected has already gone through its review for equity, and now we're just looking at the conglomerate. So and I think when you brought that up, there was a little bit of conflation of those two.
Well, I was really speaking to the staff who are well aware of these issues. Right. I think it was a mixed group that was just starting up that you were part of. Yeah. So I'm sure I didn't address the full room well enough, but.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Not for the minutes, that's just for me.
Yeah, sure.
You said you have the data in great granularity.
Yeah.
I seem to remember at my first meeting here, there was a specific acronym for the
yeah,
so
so I went to 10 years of MPO meetings, everyone, pretty much. I haven't been going the last 10 years, so, Rob and others, forgive me if I'm screwing things up and they've changed. But basically, the unit of analysis is traffic analysis zones. It could probably be better called transportation analysis zones instead of traffic, but most people say traffic. And those turn out to be about 1/3 of a census tract. Their boundaries are set a little bit differently because they're, instead of the population itself setting the punctuation of how often they occur, it's actually the travel intensity. But there's a relational table that relates the TAZs which is the real, that is the fundamental unit of analysis, the TAZ, to the census tract. So people, doing GIS or stuff can relate those. Does that help you? Does that make sense?
That's exactly.
Okay.
I would just say, I know I haven't been involved with this aspect of CTS for a while, but over a year ago at least now, they were certainly working on a new methodology for estimating equity.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that stands.
Yeah, so I'm not up to date on that, Rob. So I mean, it would probably be a good thing for me to check on that. When I was following all the MPO meetings, just at that point, they had changed from a little bit over 900 TAZs to 2,727 for the region, which is Boston and 100 surrounding cities and towns. And then they do another band outside to get the boundary conditions. I've never thought anything but extremely highly about the data analysis. It's really good.
Does anybody else want to talk about anything?
Just want to apologize, I need to step out
Yeah.
for a call at 6:30.
Oh, sure.
So are we doing new business, or are we just on external meetings?
If we're done with external meetings, let's go to new business because we have the time.
Did people have a chance to look at the draft of the letter that I sent? There has been a draft for the autonomous vehicle working group. It's mostly on testing, but there's also going to be some development of policies. So they did the draft, and I think it'd be good for us to comment on that draft. I guess they had 11 meetings. I probably went to 9 of them. I thought they were very well-run meetings, as are just about any meetings that are run by Cape Victor. But I thought it was a very good process. It was all of them open to the public. There's lots of good information there. So the first part of the letter is just kind of chiming in on that, and the policy stuff. I'll just read you what I wrote. Oh, thanks. Yeah.
I did the same thing.
We support the creation of a connected/autonomous vehicle committee and the recommendations for the members of the committee. We hope that a major effort is made to ensure that members of each of the state's metropolitan planning organizations are part of the committee. The second point is, since committees monthly meetings will be internal, so we feel that there should be meetings with the public on a quarterly basis instead of once a year, because the recommendation is they have just one meeting for the public once a year. My feelings are, let's go for 4, so that it just gets this whole issue into the public's mind more. In the beginning, there may not be much participation by the public, but I think as people become more and more aware of the technology and its probable eminence, and they'll care more, and so maybe more attendance later on. But at least aim for 4, maybe settle for 2. These meetings could coincide with the recommended quarterly updates, which could also be expanded in scope in order to be more comprehensive and with more of an appeal to the broader public interest and concerns. The reasons for that sentence is that right now I think the scope, the main scope is going to still be on safety and testing. But the preface to the section 5 recommendations were all of these benefits, that could come about from a good connected autonomous vehicle policy. So if they broaden out the scope for the public meetings and reports that they will issue to the public, then that would create more public interest. And also, it's like, let's push them to open up scope, because I'm not sure of any other group that's going to be doing this, although there is a governor's plan. I guess the governor had this group that's talking about the future of transportation, and they are supposed to issue a report in December, so they may have a group that is dedicated to autonomous vehicles too, so I'll wait and see what happens with that. But since they are planning on making recommendations on the draft at the beginning of December, we couldn't wait until that report comes out in order to write this letter. The third is that we support the collaboration with other states and regional initiatives, especially those in New England. And fourth is that we support and encourage the putative committee's pursuit of funding for further research on CAVs in conjunction with academic and other institutions. That's just to say that we like, the last two sections, in 2 paragraphs in the overview of section 5, which was policy considerations. So that's it. I mean, I could easily drop 3 and 4, but I thought that it was good that they added those. I mean, it just kind of fleshed this out a little more, but it needed us in the first 2. So that's it. So I tried to keep it on the short side. If the group supports having a letter out there, I'll go ahead and send it. I'll send it sooner rather than later. And with respect to what goes on our website, we could, work it a little more, and then if we change it beyond a typo or something, we can just say a similar letter was sent to the autonomous vehicle working group, and this is our position on, that.
I think that's a good idea.
So since they, I think, want to make comments by the end of the week, I'd like to get this to them tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, I could wait till Thursday, but if the group is fine with it, I'll do tomorrow.
How do people feel about it?
Well, I think it's fine. I appreciate that every members kind of step up for the group and do these kinds of things, Len. So there's a little typo in the 3rd line from the end, access to transportation for all, everyone. I don't know, maybe you caught those. Maybe I've got an earlier.
No, you don't have those. So where is it?
Well, you've got all and everyone.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah.
You probably need to cross one out. And then I just had one little comment.
Sure.
I mean, you picked up another typo when you read it.
Yeah.
Then the comment I have is involving all 13 regions. I think that's a great idea, but it's really hard to have meetings that involve people from every area of the state regularly because of the distance covered.
That's what technology is for.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean,
It's like you call in. I mean, this is a conference call.
No, I agree with the inclusiveness. I just was imagining meetings hopping around to all 13 MPOs, and when it's in North Adams in February, I don't know how much Boston traffic they're going to get, but.
Right. Well, I mean, if they want to do that, fine. But still, I mean, but to the extent that the people in Boston don't want to go out there, then they should call in. It's like, set up the technology and do it. But not. I would say don't include them because you feel that it's burdensome. It's like it's not. I mean, it's like we can do this.
Okay.
No,
that's fine. That's perfectly acceptable.
That's a very good answer, yeah. We forget sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know.
So I like the letter. I don't know if anybody else has any comments or feelings towards having the letter sent. I think it's terrific.
Yeah. Well, sleep on it. If you have some ideas, wordsmithing. I love wordsmithing. You know what I mean? So don't feel that I'm gonna be offended if you want to reword something. Give it to me. I'll probably incorporate it, but the author does have.
The finals.
Yeah.
It's your artistic.
Otherwise, if you want to say, I like your idea, let me rewrite it, then you take authorship and then it's yours and it's get out. So I'm fine
Well,
with that.
thank you for doing that.
Sure.
Anything else? I think.
I have one other tiny thing.
Sure.
From time to time, we try to work on passes for the universities.
Yeah, we had a couple of people here that were going to look into it too.
I know. So I do think that's worth following up. But during the chamber presentation, I had a thought that, we're embarking on a new quick update of the regional plan, MAPC is, which is done hand in hand with Boston MPO. And the last time around, I was on this steering committee for 8 years. I mean, that took a long time to do the Metro feature. And that outside, they had some outside folks come in, look from time to time at the region and process. And two things. One, they thought that, you know, we had more intellectual assets and less cooperation than any other region they looked at, basically in the world. But the other thing that's more relevant to the past issue is they really identified during the last regional plan that the eds and meds were the business leaders here, the educational institutions and the medical institutions. And that got me thinking when we were talking with the chamber presentation, that maybe we should see if we could ask the eds and meds to get together with the universities, or I mean, to join both of those in a TPAS leadership effort, you know, rather than going to everybody in the chamber and working on that. If I've been working a fair amount with partners, which I know is controversial from time to time, because biggest employer in the state, private sector at least, but they're really progressive on some things. Their core staff are really progressive on sustainability, on climate, and on transportation. And I wonder if we could get a few of the leaders in the medical community to work with a few of the leaders in the educational community. I mean, MIT was out in front decades ago on what they do with passes, but our universities have been incredibly laggard compared to Chicago, for example. So anyway, that's just I just want to toss that on the table.
Sure. Well, I mean, we can have Brendan, we can come and talk with Full Rock. There's another guy, I forget, his first name is Paul, I forget his last name, but, you know, he does work in the Longwood area, I mean, attends a lot. He's like one of the people that is usually invited to be on various committees, for an MBTA and developing policy, stuff like that. I'll come up with his last name and contact him and see what he has to say.
Yeah, and I've been meeting, we're starting a new TMA at Assembly Square, Transportation Management Association, which is a requirement of a community settlement. And it's been a little slow starting. Federal Realty was a little lax in the timing, but it's real now. And partners, you know, their office and computer and finance and telephone staff are centralized now at Assembly Square. The facilities manager there is phenomenal at this stuff. I mean, he's just a real good hands-on, very constructive about, even though they have everything they need probably in-house, they're a very constructive participant in the area planning. So that's a part of why I brought it up.
Yeah.
Well, I thought, if I could just say a little more about the presentation, but
Sure.
It makes, I understand it better now since it's just a research shop of one, the level of research that came out. I mean, I don't question the data and the analysis, but I guess I was kind of wondering, I guess I had an issue with some of the conclusions, because it's not clear to me that businesses are affected by, you know, the fact that people are spending time in congestion. Because it's not like, you know, people get to work and they work fewer hours. I mean, they work fewer hours because they're in congestion. It's more like, you know, so the businesses aren't affected by this 2.4 billion, you know, that people could potentially be making, you know, and because of the 60 hours, you know, that they're spending in congestion. And it's also not clear to me that people put the same value on the time they spend in congestion that they put on that time, because to a certain extent, you know, if you are, you know, in your car and you're jamming out to your music or listening to NPR, or unfortunately yakking on your phone, you know, then you're kind of getting stuff done, you know, while you're in traffic. So it's not quite the black hole of time that you might think if someone, you know, put up, you know, well, you could be making, you know, $20 an hour, you know, they just don't value it that way. So it's not clear to me that people are affected by the congestion as much, so that there isn't that kind of visceral feeling that I need to do things differently because I'm losing out on all this time.
I also don't think that people who drive into places are as frustrated with traffic as the people who take the T, and you wait for the T, and it's cold outside, and then the train comes by and it's too full for you to pack on, and then you've got to wait for the next one. And I think that the frustration that we feel towards the T or towards the bus that doesn't show up is a lot greater than the frustration we feel when we're sitting in traffic, because we know when the traffic is and we expect it. Where the T, even though the T, we still hold that hope each day that it's going to be okay. You know, and we bring that to it every single day, that maybe if I come 5 minutes earlier, or maybe if I try it a little bit later, and then it turns out that no, it's just kind of crappy.
Well, just to that point, there's actually been, I forget how long ago the study was, but it's about the feeling of control. People who are in cars have a sense of self-control, but on public transit, you feel like you're not in control, especially when you're surrounded by a mob scene if it's rush hour.
That's true, and when you're driving, there's no better driver than you, but when you're on a bus and it's going slowly, well, aren't they the worst driver you've ever met? You know, and I that's interesting, because I think the frustration of waiting is sometimes really awful too. If you think about if you're waiting for an appointment to show up, and the later they get, the more aggravated you are, but when you're late, you're like, oh.
This may be something that people have heard, but I'll just state it again. That was one of the big things that the real-time data initiative was targeting, was to put some feeling of empowerment, no, maybe not empowerment, but some feeling of understanding and having a sense of control, even if they didn't really control it, knowing, oh yeah, the next bus will really be here in 3 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I want to talk positively now.
Okay.
Strange as it may seem.
Go for it.
Forest Hills, it's been working now. You go and you look and you can see when your next bus comes. And I'm at Broadway Station on the Red Line for the last about a month. They have a big sign that says which buses are coming in how many minutes.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I would like to see more of those throughout the system. It's total wind control, even though if you've ever been to Broadway Station, it's a wind tunnel. It's awful to wait there, but if you know you only have to wait 5 minutes, much better.
Yeah, good point.
That's a very good point.
I'd like to add to the issue of frustration and who's frustrated. You know, if we took a single lane on the Southeast Expressway and in the morning we made it only inbound for express buses and in the evening only outbound for express buses, and you had those buses going by, those sitting cars, the buses were going 60 miles an hour, that would really help with that frustration, and also with the shift maybe. You know, because people are going to sit there for 30 days, but after a while they're going to say, hey, wait a second, that bus is going 5 times as fast as I am.
I'm not stupid, you will, you're right, about 30 days in, you realize that you're stupid.
I remember when the HOV lane on the Southeast Expressway was first planned, implemented, there was a design aspect of it. Oh, hey, well, when people see the HOV lane whizzing by, I think part of the reason why that's not as effective now is because I think since the HOV lane was deployed, they've actually raised up the barriers. So people who are stuck in the traffic on the regular lanes don't have as much of a visual of the HOV traffic. So, you know, there's a little bit of a...
It's too bad they're not right in the middle, so everybody can see.
Anyway. The other impetus for people to have cars, I know a girl, one of my girlfriends drives to work, but she has other things she has to do after work or before work, and she can do them with a car.
Yeah.
So if you just are going from your house to your job to your house, that's one thing. But if you want to stop at some place or have a doctor's appointment, car is like the best. I know since I don't drive, everything takes forever.
Well, try to do that 10 miles out in the suburbs on transit. It's that what you just described is much harder.
Yeah, and it just, you know, things that I think I can get done in the day, I can't. I have to say, I can't do that because it'll take me an hour to get there.
also think enormous amount of the bus drivers are very impressive.
Yes, yes. Kudos to the bus drivers.
And now that I have friends now that tell me that when they get a particularly good bus driver, they just find them so calm when things are getting when everybody else is nerve-wracked, that they stay calm, and that they manage to just sort of, do the job and keep it going, and I do hear a lot of good praise for the bus drivers.
Yes, they deserve it.
I think it's a selection process. I think if you can't be calm, you wouldn't survive in that job.
Well, I'll never forget, the first meeting I went to was one of the marketing meetings, and the bus guy was there.
Dave Carney?
Yeah, and he was so great. He said, not everybody has the personality to be in a bus that says Harvard on the front and to answer 100 times in a day, yep, going Harvard. He said, it's just not for everybody. And I now think about that.
Yeah.
So if we, I'll go right ahead, Stefan.
Also, just one follow-up item from Ben's presentation.
Sure.
Because I'm a Lynn guy, as I've said so many times before, and because Lynn, as I think it was just a week or two ago, was going to have it was a request for studying a proposal to produce a study or something like that.
Right.
But because that is going to be impacting Lynn, I'm going to, I didn't have a chance to bring it up tonight to Ben. I'm going to drop him a note and say, oh, hey, by the way, if you want to coordinate or keep in touch about this Lynn project,
Great.
I'm a Lynn guy. So, I mean, I don't know if the Boston Chamber of Commerce has really any care in the world about what happens outside the city of Boston, but since there's a big study going on, I just want to give them a heads up about that.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else, or should we move on to, is there any other public comments?
Well, yeah, I'll make one quick new business item. I didn't have a chance to fully digest it because there's so much there, but I mentioned in email to everybody about the new, at least I think they're brand new off the press, the user's guide. The commuter rail one seemed to hit first, and now there's the winter guide, planning your trip to, there's 4 user guides now. I've never seen anything like them. The depth and breadth of topics, the layout. I am really floored about how well they're put together, the topics. But I think we'll cover this probably in the marketing communications operations subcommittee in more depth. But I really want to know from people, what did they not put in there? What did they forget? I called out one thing about commuter rail that they did forget, the importance of don't open your own doors because of various reasons I won't go into now. But now that there's the winter resiliency guide or the bus guide, I would really like to have people look them over because we all have our own views of what people should know, what do people not understand that they should understand about how their behavior affects the whole system.
Does it bring up backpacks?
Right. Does it? I don't remember. I think it does.
I haven't had a chance to look at anything else.
So that's something, like I said, I'll bring that up now that I'm the co-chair of the subcommittee. I'll bring that up for the December subcommittee. But even if you're not a regular attendee for that subcommittee, please take a look and send us, because the fact that it's out there means that they really care. I've been pushing for years to try to get a user's guide, and it's there. Let's make sure it's got everything it needs to have.
But is anybody reading it?
We can ask David Block-Schechter about that, or somebody from IT department about IT things like stats. I'm sure they collect. Actually, I know they collect readership on it because one of the links that I followed had one of those UTF, it had one of those tracking add-on links that said, oh, this guy clicked on this link on this page to get to here. So somebody's collecting stats. Just a question of, is somebody looking at the results?
And the next day after these 2 weeks early, it's next Thursday.
I saw. Is it next Thursday? Yeah.
Yeah. So instead of being the 3rd Thursday of the month, it's going to be the 1st Thursday of the month.
Yeah. I think the marketing communications operations is still on the regular.
Yeah, it's still on the regular.
Thursday.
Lenny, is that going to be in 2019 also, or
No.
going to go back to the regular?
2019, and we can change this if we want. Both meetings were moved up a week. So the marketing was moved up a week, and the finance was moved up a week. So marketing is going to be the first week of the month, and finance is going to be the second week of the month. You know.
I'm glad you called that out, because I forgot.
Okay, well,
Let's
I'm
do
gonna
20.
move on-
Let's do 19. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna move on to any public comments.
Yeah, you had a hand up earlier, but we didn't get to get to you before Ben had to leave.
It was a revenue question. I wondered if the MBTA had assets a la Massport that would rent out on 99-year leases to generate revenue.
What was that question? I didn't hear.
Does the MBTA have any assets like Massport does where they can generate revenue through 99-year leases on underutilized land?
Probably. There are issues with rail corridors because they're federally regulated, so you can't, like rail trails.
Yeah, no, I see that all that empty land. That was one of the things.
Yeah,
in mind,
so
but-
there's a special process when you're going to, well, if you abandon any rail property that's operational, there has to be hearings because of federal regulations. They tend to be perfunctory, but if it's just temporary, you know, if it's a lease, 99 years or less, then it's less of an issue.
I thought also that the T had been selling some stuff up by, I was eating breakfast somewhere and I overheard some guy bragging about some housing project he was gonna put up on some T land.
Yeah, but it probably wasn't operating land, it probably was other facilities.
Okay.
Oh, hey Barry, you had a question that you wanted to ask. Something that was actually more MBTA related, not the Chamber of Commerce. Do you want to ask that question now?
I don't know if we could, well,
It was about fare revenue, wasn't it?
there's been a problem with fare evasion. I don't know how much it may, and it may be on some routes as opposed to other routes. But what I can tell you is last night I was on the Beacon Street car, and I guess there was a delay before it showed up because the operator is just waving everyone through. This is outbound. And there's another streetcar almost on top of us. Now, I was looking and his fare box was basically turned off.
Like it was faulty, perhaps?
I don't know. It may have been faulty or it may have been turned off.
Where was this? What stop?
This was on
The C line.
on the C line.
Yeah, but from what stop to what stop?
This is outbound.
Right, I thought they don't collect outbound.
He was, outbound, they do collect.
I thought that they did collect outbound.
They used to,
They used
they
to
used
not.
to.
Time ago.
I haven't
Yeah.
lived
It's
there.
hardly on the MBTA.
I'm not on the.
Yeah, they reinstated.
I lived in Brooklyn for years and I just don't go there anymore.
It used to be free.
Yeah.
Right, well, it wasn't free, you got really sucked in.
And then about two fare changes ago, they started charging.
Oh my goodness, if I got on it today, it wouldn't occur to me, okay?
And sometimes they'd even make announcements. So the way they would enforce this is that everyone had to board on the front door only. This is on off hours.
Yeah.
Now, to some extent, the people who get on that may well have passes anyway, but I wouldn't, as a civilian, I wouldn't know. But the test is when they put the new fare boxes, new non-fare boxes in, the new system, and the operator will no longer be worrying about this. And I think after generations of people have been paying and not paying or whatever, to say that, okay, everyone is going to have their own, is just going to tap on the way in,
And tap off.
or tap off, they may be tapping off too. It sounds good, but on some routes, I'm not going to tell all kinds of stories, but I'm not optimistic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barry.
Okay, anything else anybody wants to discuss, or are we gonna actually close up shop a few moments early?
Good idea.
What?
Good idea.
Good idea?
Motion closed.
A reward.
Okay,
Yeah.
motion, I got a motion to close the shop. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I just want to say, I mean, while we're packing up, I mean, it takes me 10 minutes to pack up. If you wanted to ask about, you know, details of the committee, if you're interested in applying, feel free. We'll be happy to chat with you afterwards.
Appreciate it, thank you very much.
Do I have a second to close up shop?
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you, everybody.
I'm so happy you're here.
And we are stopping. Thank you for listening online.